Good afternoon, everyone. This is Bracha Meltzer, certified coach, director of TCL Coaching, and you're with your weekly forum on Chazaq Radio. Today, my special guests are Yehuda Shaffer, who has been a lone soldier in the IDF, and his mother, Bronia Shaffer, and we are going to be discussing their experiences while Yehuda was in the IDF, and what does it mean to be a lone soldier in Nachal Charedi. So to begin with, please tell us a little bit about yourself, Yehuda, before you even talk about your experiences in the IDF.
Hi, a little bit about myself. I grew up in Crown Heights in Brooklyn, and we were raised very much in Lubavitch, obviously, but also with like a very open mind. Like we all knew growing up, my parents always instilled in us that whatever we really wanted to do, we could. We could. So I have a sister who became a doctor, a sister became a lawyer. That's how we were brought up. So, and it did kind of affect afterwards when I decided to go to the army, knowing that like my parents trusted our judgment and that kind of thing.
It's a wonderful way to be brought up, to have independent thought and to be respectful for what you really want. Good for you, Bronia. Model mom.
It wasn't quite so simple, and I'm happy to hear that Yehuda has those recollections. I have to say that at the time that Yehuda made the decision, yes, it is definitely what we always told our children, that they had to be passionate about things, they had to be passionate about what they wanted to do in life, that the world was wide open, so with a very, firm, strong basis in Yiddishkeit, in Chassidishkeit, like living as a Lubavitcher. And it was very much the Lubavitch ideal also, that it's not about protecting yourself from things, but rather having the confidence with Torah, with Chassidus, to be able to face anything in the world. So that was pretty much the perspective with which we tried to raise our children. But I think when Yehuda actually made the decision to do it, it wasn't quite so simple for him.
So tell us a little bit about how you felt when he made the decision, knowing that you had instilled this together with the Lubavitch outlook, that he should go for what he desired. Were you afraid?
Was I afraid? Well, I remember when he left New York to go to Israel via France. He stopped in France for a while. We have family there. He spent a little bit of time in yeshiva there, which was the yeshiva that he'd been in as a bacher, and then made plans to go to Israel. And when he got to Israel, he wasn't quite clear about what his plans were, although my husband subsequently said that he was quite sure he knew what was going on. But I remember that phone call when Yehuda called and said that there was something very serious he wanted to discuss with us. In his mind, it was a decision made. For us, it wasn't something that he conferred with us on, for very good reason. So my initial gut reaction was, yes, absolutely. And then my secondary reaction was, oh no, what's a good Chassidish Lubavitcher boy doing in the army? And that's where a lot of cultural influences clouded a lot of our discussion with Yehuda.
I can imagine.
He didn't have an easy time with us. I subsequently asked his mechila. I'll be very honest about that. We didn't give him an easy time. His father very much tried to dissuade him. And I remember the moment where everything turned around. I don't know if you remember that phone call, Yehuda, when his father was trying to discourage him from doing it. And this was all long distance on the phone. And Yehuda was speaking to me and asked me, what's Abba's issue? Why doesn't Abba want me to do this? We were talking about different things, none of which really mattered. And he said, and of course the sense then was that a bacher going from yeshiva into the IDF, the immediate gut response, and he told us this right away, he said, when you tell people, I just want you to know, everyone's going to think that I'm moving away from Yiddishkeit, that I'm letting go of. He said, it's not true. That's not what's happening. And of course that was sort of the cultural reaction. But I remember when he asked me, he said, Imo, why is Abba bothered? Why is he trying to dissuade me? And I said, well, Yehuda, in our circles, we don't do that. And there was a split second of silence, and he said to me, Ima, I can't believe you're saying that to me. And I was busted. I felt this was exactly the opposite of everything we always taught.
Mm-hmm.
And after that phone call was when I told my husband, I am 100% encouraging him. All of this is nonsense. What he wants to do is good and right and true. And
That took a lot of courage. It took a lot of courage on both your parts. On your part, Yehuda, to be able to say, you taught me to be independent. You taught me that as long as I feel strong in my Yiddishkeit, that I can go anywhere and do anything. And this is where I want to be. And on the part of parents, and I know for myself as a parent, the concerns, and my children are in England and in Chicago, and they're away, but they're not going to be in a situation which could possibly bring them, chas v'shalom, into crisis situations or harmful situations. So I can imagine if, that I would feel nervous or concerned. And kol hakavod to both of you for being able to reconcile and have a good relationship about the decision. So now tell us what it was like and how you ended up in Nachal Charedi.
Alright, so I'll backtrack just a little bit. That growing up, I always had this little dream of as a little boy, first being a fireman, then being a policeman, and then being an army man. And the one that I never actually grew out of was the being an army man one. So when I finished yeshiva, I wasn't that good a student in yeshiva. I wasn't doing very well in yeshiva, but I went through the system and I finished, we finished Shir Dalet, which is the highest shir we have in Crown Heights. And all my friends went off to other yeshivas to help out in other yeshivas, a year of shlichus, which is what we do the next year. But I wasn't really going to do that. And it was a long, hard decision, coming to terms with that, it's something that I want to do and it's something that it's possible to do and it's something that I could actually do. Until I did my research and a couple of friends of mine helped me out, looking at these different programs. Generally speaking, in Israel, Israelis are drafted for a 3-year stint in the army. It's a draft. But they have something called Nachal, which is an acronym for Mitnadvei Chutz La'aretz, which is a program for Jewish people who are non-Israelis who want to join the army. And instead of doing 3 years, you do 14 and a half months. And I found out about this, and I did the research, and I finally ended up going to Israel. And when I was there, initially when I wanted to go, I had heard of Nachal Haredi before, but I was like, no, not for me. I want to be in the real army. I don't want to be in some special religious unit. I want to be in the real army. And that's it. That was my attitude. And a few weeks after I had landed in Israel, I loved going to the Kaisel on Friday night. And one Friday night I was there, and sitting in the back, just watching the people come and go, in the whole plaza. And shortly before Ma'ariv, I suddenly saw this group of 30, 60, 70, I don't even remember how many soldiers, obviously soldiers, because they were all, they were wearing white shirts, but they all had M16s strapped to their backs, marching in. And I was like, wow, it looked pretty impressive. And I quickly realized that this was a group of soldiers from Nachal Charedi. And much to my surprise, I actually recognized one of them. A friend of mine from yeshiva suddenly stepped out. He's like, hey, how you doing? And I was like, wow, I didn't know you were in the army. And we ended up sitting down and talking. So until then, my attitude had been that I just want to join the army, and specifically not Nachal Charedi. But when I sat down and spoke to my friend, he was very strict with me. He said, listen, you'll have a great time wherever you go in the army. You'll do fine, I'm sure. You'll stay religious. I don't think you won't. But in the Nachal Charedi, it will make it easy to stay religious. And anywhere else in the army, you're going to run into major issues. It's going to happen because not everyone's so understanding, and the army obviously has an agenda different from you being religious. That's not their top priority. But in Nachal Charedi, you have nothing to worry about. In that respect, if being from and keeping, mitzvahs and everything is very important to you, here's a place you could go to the army and not have to worry about any of those things. And that's where I made my decision. You know what? That's the place where, I was coming from yeshiva. I wasn't exactly very fit. I figured I'm going to have a hard enough time with the physical aspects of being in the army that at least the spiritual things of staying from, I should not have to struggle with. And that's when I made the decision to go to Nachal Haredi as opposed to anywhere else in the army.
It sounds like a very wise decision coming from where you came from, and also recognizing that being fit, physically fit, you wanted to stay spiritually fit, and our environment, whether we like it or not, really does play out. Who are our friends? And there's a tefillah that mothers say every Friday night, Hashem, please keep our children safe, keep them right, rebbes, right mentors, right friends, and the right sviva, because we want to make sure our children don't go astray. And so tell us what it really meant to be a lone soldier. I mean, Israelis in the army have their families, their friends, when they're off base, when it comes to the Chagim. What accommodations were made for you? Even to, let's say, if you were off base where you wanted to go wash your laundry or anything like that.
So, like you said, the Israeli army is very different from other armies. Well, I can't say a lot of other armies, but I know, like, in America you go to the army and you'll go to basic training and you don't see your family for a few months. You're off basic training, where you get deployed somewhere and you're away from home for a year. In Israel, it's not like that. It's a draft, so everyone has to go. It's 18-year-old boys. You're taking 18-year-old boys out of their home to draft them for 3 years. So the army is very family-oriented in a way. They have family days where all the families come down, and they're encouraged to participate. Some units are better about it than others, but there is a lot of family involvement. And most guys in the army, most Israelis, have friends, have family, their father, their brothers. They've been through it before. They've been there. You go home once a week or once every couple of weeks. A lot of times for Shabbos, a lot of times during the week. So it's not like you're away for months at a time, but you're away for a few weeks, and then you go home. So laundry you'll do at home. Shabbos, a lot of times you're at home. In fact, one of the big punishments to say that you were in the army for a full 30 days and not being home is kind of like, whoa. It's harsh in Israel. So for your average soldier, you're there for a few weeks, you come home, you get to rest at home, you're back in your bed, hopefully, or for a lot of people, your mother's doing your laundry and cooking your meals and all that, and you're back home. And then, Sunday you get back on the bus and you go back to the army. For a lone soldier, it's a little different. Now, there's a few classifications of a lone soldier. Basically, it's somebody who does not have that family support. So, in one of the major cases is soldiers who either don't have family in Israel, either don't have family b'chlal, or don't have family in Israel, or their families have, not welcomed them in their house anymore, so, they don't have family for that reason. But another major category, which I fell into, was that I just was coming from out of Israel, so my family physically didn't live there. And the army has a lot of accommodations and a lot of special conditions that they give for lone soldiers. So, for instance, I used to get paid double amount of all my friends. They'd be jealous a little bit. But then again, I had a lot more expenses than my friends, because if they wanted to go out for pizza, they could always ask that to take them out. And when I was home, I had to go buy food. I had money that I had to spend. I had to pay rent. The army does have some accommodations, different housing accommodations for lone soldiers. They'll either pay a few $100s a month towards rent, or they set up people on kibbutzim, different kibbutzim, like Adopt a Soldier, or they have these army apartments. they're okay options. They're not great options. They're definitely not like living at home.
I visited that army apartment for an evening. As a mother, I have to say that I would recommend that mothers don't visit their sons' army apartments.
Well, I think that that's important, that, you know, when they're in the army, they're living a different lifestyle, and roughing it is just part, you know, whether we like it or not, is part and parcel of what an army, you know, lifestyle is. You know, it's not being cushy and easy and comfortable. You know.
I interrupted you.
Yeah, go ahead.
You were saying.
Bichlal, I think in the last few months since we had the latest conflict in Gaza, there has been a lot of attention to this idea of lone soldiers, especially since a couple of lone soldiers, even an American, was killed in that conflict. So the whole concept has been brought to light a lot more. But generally speaking, the Army is aware of different issues and tries to accommodate, but it's not, you know, it leaves much to be desired. So you have different programs, like I said, different options for housing. You have programs where they'll pay you a little bit extra money that you could spend in the grocery store, or one of the rules is you're allowed to take food off of the base. You know, you could go to your commander and ask for permission to go into the base kitchen and take food, whatever you find, to take home with you, to have what to eat. But it's not like going home. Now the interesting thing is, I personally had people to be with in Israel. You know, I had family, I had friends, and I actually had, when I was there for most of the time I was in the Army, I was staying by very close family friends, and which was great. And it was almost like being home, but it's still not the same. And whenever I speak to different friends of mine, or different people who also, you know, different lone soldiers, we all kind of experience the same thing. So in my case, it was a very mild case of it, because I did have, you know, kind of family to go to, so I knew I had a bed, and we even had a washing machine there. It was great, you know, it's like, it was a home, but it still wasn't my home. It wasn't the same as going to, you know, to your own home. Friends of mine had it much rougher. I had, they really, like, literally would get off base on Friday and just throw up their hands, where are we for Shabbos? Who's making Shabbos? Where are we going to be? Where are we going to eat? And every time you're off, instead of, you know, being happy, oh, I finally get a day off in the Army, it's a struggle. What am I doing for the next 24 hours? And it's very, the striking thing was that as much as I spoke to people, it wasn't like some of us had that problem. Other people who were more friendly and more outgoing didn't really deal with that. But everybody I've spoken to really had that same issue, had these same issues. Laundry was another big deal. It was like, where are we going to do our laundry? So once in a while, I'd give to one of my friends to bring home to his house, and they'd come do their laundry for me, which was great. The Army does laundry, but it takes about 2 weeks. So if you have extra socks and underwear for 2 weeks, then yeah, you know, technically they'll do that for you, and it comes back nice and folded and everything. But you know, it's not very practical. It's just it's different. It's not like being at home. It's not like going home.
Here's a question for you. You grew up in America, speaking English, being your native language. How did you make the transition? Not just going into the Army, which is a totally different culture. You know, we're civilians, so we don't think about, well, if we're working, the alarm goes off, maybe we'll hit the snooze button and get up 5 minutes or 10 minutes later. But very often what happens is that, you know, we are free to do what we want, when we want, and we don't necessarily think we have so much freedom, you know, because you have to go to work, you have to do this, you have to do that. But when you're in the Army, things are very regimented. So you may be having to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, or whatever time, you know, appel is. I don't know whether they call it appel in the Israeli Army. But tell us what would be, or share with us what would be, how your day started, what did you do, and also how did you learn to integrate the language so that when you were being given orders, how it would become automatic. because I think that, especially in a crisis situation, could create problems or challenges.
Yehuda, start with what you told me about the flag raising and
No, go ahead.
Well, first of all, I remember when I was in the Army, it's definitely a headspace. Like, I knew I'm not going to summer camp, I'm going to the Army, and I knew that this is a place where there are orders, there's no suggestions, this is what you're doing. And I was doing this voluntarily, and I knew what I was signing up for, and I was doing it willingly. So there actually, unfortunately there are, especially now, there are a lot of Americans who go to the Israeli Army. It's become more popular thing to do, this Nachal program. And there are some guys who really run into that. They don't realize what they're getting into, and they're like, no, I don't want to get up right now. And it's really, there's not, you don't have that option. And if you don't have that mind space, if you don't make that switch that, I'm not my own boss anymore, now I'm in the Army, it's very difficult. And they have a much harder time with that, not having done that. I remember often when I'd get off and friends of mine would ask me, like, so what do you do? Like, what's a typical day? And I never knew what to answer because, like, every day was different. But one thing that always came to mind was my shoes. We had a couple of minutes in the morning to get dressed, and, everything is with time. So you wake up and you line up outside. You got to be 6 o'clock in the morning. You're lined up outside. So we're lined up outside, and then the sergeant will come out and say, all right, you guys got 3 minutes to shine your boots and shave for whoever shaves. And you ran off, you did that, you had to be 3 minutes on the dot, you had to be back there lined up. All right, you guys have 2 minutes to go brush your teeth. And we run off, brush our teeth, come back. And that's basically how the day would go. So what was our schedule? We didn't really have a schedule, but I remember one day when I didn't tighten my boots in the morning, and I figured, okay, you know what, I'll do it a little later. I just kind of rolled up the laces and stuck them in my boots. And it wasn't until like midday that I finally got a chance to actually tie them. And it was just like, that was striking. I don't know what I'm doing all day, but I did not have time to tie my boots till hours after the morning. So yeah, typical day in Nachal Charedi, you wake up, you do the morning things, getting dressed, shining your boots, shower, brush your teeth, whatever. Then you'd have an hour for Shacharis, and it would be the same thing. You'd be lined up, they'd say, all right, you guys got 1 hour to daven Shacharis, go. And we'd run off, daven. An hour is obviously an okay time to daven Shacharis, but an hour later you had to be back there lined up, finished after having daven. And we'd have line up every morning with raising the flag, and which is in every unit of the Army. The difference being that by us, when we'd raise the flag, we'd sing Hatikva, and afterwards we'd sing Animan, which was always very special. To be standing there, and, with all the other soldiers and singing Animan I always found that pretty powerful. And then you're off to training, whatever it was that day. It was shooting, was all kinds of things, just anything. There was no typical day. Every day was different.
Is the exercise, the Army exercise, is very much like what people see on movies? Over those, jumping up over these high things, and also with the ropes and swinging and or not.
Well, you have the exercise regiments, which were 30 push-ups and running and this and that, and then you had the punishment, which is always going on, which is, okay, you were 5 seconds late to lining up, so now you gotta. I say everything was timed, so you'd have 2 minutes, be back here. If you weren't back in 2 minutes, and you were, let's say, a second late, so the sergeant would say, okay, now you owe me a second. How are you going to pay back that second? You got 10 seconds to run from here, touch that wall, and be back here. And if you get back earlier than 10 seconds, then you paid back a little bit of that time. And that's how you pay back the time that you were late. So yeah, you have a lot of running around. And we had the obstacle course, which was, climbing up the ropes, jumping over the wall, the monkey bars, and climbing under the wire and all that. Man, a lot of running. Always a lot of running, something that I never enjoyed. But
you ran with or without your backpacks?
For the most part, running was without, but we had times that we always did with as well. So there's there's also different fitness tests that you have to pass, and those are the obstacle courses. One of them where it was with your gear, so you'd be running with your gun and your backpack and all that.
Were you ever woken up in the middle of the night to do exercises?
Exercise, not so much. Guard duty all the time, every night. You go to sleep at 6. The sleep in the army is 6 hours. So whenever you go to sleep, 6 hours later is reveille. And in that 6 hours, you usually had a half-hour guard duty somewhere in that 6 hours.
I'm just going to take a radio break, to say you're listening to the weekly forum on Chazaq Radio with Bracha Meltzer, and my two guests are Yehuda and Bronia Shaffer. We're talking about their experiences with Nachal Haredi. And if any of you want to walk away from your computer, the number to listen in is 401-283-6664. That's 401-283-6664. So tell us from your point of view, Bronia, while Yehuda was in the army, he was already there, and you were able to obviously phone him or write, etc., and send care packages like all good mommies do. What were you feeling back here? You know, from what he says and what you said before, I imagine a certain amount of pride, but was there, tell us about the fear part, if there was any.
Well, as my husband said, one of the results of Yehuda's having joined the army was that it certainly raised the level of davening a notch or two. There's no question about that. The fear factor was something that I certainly had to deal with, but consistently and constantly just set it aside, consciously, deliberately, telling myself that there was no place for that. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu runs the world, that as much as I fear for all my children's safety, his being in the army, perhaps technically I would say he was at greater risk for bodily harm than my other children who were living safely at home, yet knowing that those are decisions that were completely God's, not mine. And just really feeling a certain protection for him there. Part of this came also from the Rebbe's constantly talking about that Eretz Yisrael was the safest place to be, and at times of crisis, during, I believe it was, do you remember the first Lebanon War, or maybe just by the I don't remember when it was. I'm sorry, I should have checked this more specifically. But when a lot of yeshivas were telling kids, American kids, that they were, they closed the yeshiva, they're ready to go home, and the Rebbe was very much opposed to that. Told people not to change their plans, and on several occasions said it's the safest place to be. So of course, it was with that assurance really, and not being silly about it, not thinking, oh, for sure everything's going to be fine, knowing fully well that my son was at much or as little risk as any of his brothers or sisters who were serving with him. But nonetheless, it's where I sort of felt that I was part of the sisterhood of mothers of children in the army, where they really were doing what was right. It was very right. It wasn't only about his passion for it, but that it was the right thing to do. Part of the fear, also I had to keep reminding myself that I'm not any more or less privileged than any other mother of Israel. So his being there, yes, I'm part of that now. I'm part of that, and the Eibishter should take care of him and all those that are serving with him. But I also remember a conversation I had with him once when he said to me that, he's safe, everything will be fine. He kind of reassured me. He said, but even if, Ima, anything happens, at least it's for a reason. At least it's for a reason. It's not meaningless and insignificant.
Yes. I think you share a lot of the feelings that many of the women in Eretz Yisrael do feel. I remember I was in Israel before, during, and after the 6-Day War, and I was on Kibbutz Lavi on Hachshara, and we were a whole kfutza of kids from Denmark, Sweden, England, Ireland, France, and several of the parents, said, you've got to come, told the kids, you've got to come home. And I called my mother and I said, she has the option. She says, you are home. Where do you think you're going to go? And it made me feel really good that I had that support. And it really is home. And we are in Gullus, and we have to remember that. And I think the last couple of months have really shown us how much we are in Gullus, and that how important it is to support Klal Yisrael with Achdus, no matter what part of the Jewish framework you're in, whether you're a little bit from, not from, in between, FFB, BTs, Haredi, Litvish, Yekish, Hasidish, it really doesn't matter, because bottom line, we're all part of the wonderful mosaic of the Ribono Shel Olam's world. And Eretz Yisrael is ours, and we need to support everyone who is there. And I just want to put in something about this year being Shemitah, that as much as we want to send, we're giving tzedakah to the variety of different organizations where we feel very strongly. Nachal Haredi certainly needs funds to help the soldiers, but also to remember it's Shemitah. So remember the farmers who are equally very involved in a very, very important mitzvah, moment by moment, while they're not cultivating the land, but really are the backbone in many ways of Israel, and certainly with food. So what else in the last few minutes you want to tell us about being an American in an Israeli society? It's not, yes, I think the army is a leveler in many ways, because you're all doing the same thing, etc. But you're still socially not necessarily part of Israeli society. So you want to share some of the experiences you had?
There's definitely a different mindset, there are cultural differences. I can't think of anything specific. I had a benefit of having always gone to yeshiva, that the language wasn't that hard to pick up. Actually, when I started the army, my friends used to laugh at me and say, "You're not speaking Hebrew, you're speaking Tanachit." And then when I got home, the Israelis that I knew back here would say, "You're not speaking Hebrew, you're speaking Tza'alit." So I never could actually win that one. That was.
Yeah. How did you find taking orders in Ivrit? About guns or how to shoot or not to shoot, and I think there's a lovely story about a gun that you might want to share.
Well, I don't know if it ties into the culture in any way, but in the army you get your gun a few weeks into joining the army, like 2 or 3 weeks in, I think we got them. And everyone got their gun. I got this M16, and in the old M16s, I don't know if they even use them anymore, but in the buttstock there was like a little compartment where you could keep a cleaning kit. And I was, going through my gun the first time I got it. I opened up the little compartment. I saw a little piece of paper rolled up inside, and I pulled it out, and it was a note, and it said, "Achi sheli," it started off my brother. This gun I used for 6 months. I never used it in any kind of combat or dangerous situation, only for training and guard purposes. I wish you luck, and you should be safe, and also only use it in those situations. So
what a nice thing. Mika Amcha Yisrael. Really, Mika Amcha Yisrael.
I don't know which soldier. I never tracked down the soldier who left that particular note in the gun, but it was.
Maybe he's listening to it right now. Wouldn't that be wonderful?
Yes. So
it was nice to get. Yeah. If I could say a few words just about the Nachal Charedi, the way what's different about it from the rest of the army.
please.
So first of all, the army in general is a Jewish army, and it's supposed to all be kosher, and the whole army is supposed to be Shomer Shabbos, and you shouldn't have problems following Torah mitzvahs in any part of the army as a Jewish army. by default, and that's really the law, if I'm correct. Then you have, in the army itself, you have the Hesder programs, which is the yeshivas that have a few years of yeshiva, and then they send their boys into the army, and then they come back when they're finished the yeshiva. But these are usually groups of 30, 40 bachrim together who will go to a unit, and they'll be in a unit, not necessarily a frum unit, but just any unit. A lot of times they're very good elite units, because they're very motivated. And then they'll come back. But in those units, it's up to the group to decide their standards. So if they need more time to daven as a group, then they could try to get that, and their commander will either give it to them or not. If the group is not particularly strong, if they're not particularly stringent and cautious or anything, then things could go by the wayside, and there's nobody in charge of keeping those standards up. Nachal Charedi has, in the unit, there is a certain standard, and the standard is everything, all kosher is mahadrin. There's davening 3 times a day. There's shiurim once a day. You had a rav come down, a rabbi would come down and give a shir Torah at least once a day. And you had these standards, which are, we don't care what your personal standard is. If you're on your way up in Yiddishkeit, on your way down in Yiddishkeit, you're interested or not, you're in the Nachal Haredi, and this is part of the program. So yes, this is time to daven. You have to be in shul davening. This is time for shir rav. You have to be there. You want to space out, that's your prerogative, but you have to be there listening to the rabbi. And kashrus, this is what we have. We have mahadran kashrus. There are no girls on the base. Other bases, they have, chayalot and all kinds of positions. In Nachal Charedi, they're just not there. That's one of the things that the rabbis of the Nachal Charedi were able to get. We were able to negotiate with the army. Generally, the way it works is the unit is a regular army unit like any other, and the army obviously takes care of training and all that. So besides for the special conditions, it's a regular army unit. You have people coming. You have a lot of commanders, sergeants, and officers coming from different units who may not be from at all, but they still have to conform to these standards. So they don't have to daven. They have to give you time to daven, and obviously they're not going to be bringing in non-kosher food or anything like that. So any kind of religious issue kind of doesn't exist there as much or at all. The other part of Nachal Charedi is it's a joint effort between the army and this group, the Amutah, it's called, a group of rabbis who is in charge of the spiritual, aspect of it. So they're first of all the ones who create these standards and negotiate with the army to get these standards, that it should be, the Yiddishkeit should be up to a certain standard. And the way, one of the special things of the Nachal Charedi, it's actually not unique in the army. There are other units that have similar programs, is that it's a 2-year army service, and the 3rd year you're still a soldier, but either you go back to yeshiva, or you have, since it's geared for the Haredi population who doesn't necessarily have any secular training. So either you could go to some vocational school. I know they had electronic school. They had a wood shop, to learn how to do carpentry, or to start learning going to university. That 3rd year, called Shnat Limudim, is a year where you could either continue in the army or choose one of these other paths that will actually gear to helping people get a job afterwards. Mm-hmm. So, which was especially again for the Haredi population in Israel, which doesn't necessarily have access to those kind of things, at least not in their system. As a volunteer from America, I wasn't there for 3 years. I was only there for a year and a little bit, but that's what the main program does. Now, the army obviously pays for all the army side of it and all the training and all that, but as far as paying the rabbis or anything else, any other activities that they do, that's the Amutah on its own. They have to raise their own money. I don't know if they get funding or not from the government, but they definitely are on their own for a lot of their funding. They also have a lot of different programs, and as the years go on, Nachal Charedi is still a relatively new concept. I believe it's maybe 10 or 15 years. I don't think more than that. I'm not sure exactly, but as the years go on, I'm not in touch with them day to day, but I see the different programs and different things that they are constantly instituting. The last few years they have a kind of alumni group that they're trying to get together and helping people get jobs and helping people after they leave the army. They have recently, with the whole Haredi draft, it's become a lot harder for Haredi soldiers who want to serve to go serve. It's become a very sore subject. And the Nachal Haredi is actually, last I heard, trying to get apartments where their soldiers can stay. You know, for the different lone soldiers, either the ones coming from out of town or the ones that had been kicked out of their house, should have somewhere to stay, as opposed to the regular housing that the army provides. So they're constantly looking, you know, to expand their programming and more rabbis as the unit grows. And I believe now there's even a second unit, a second battalion of Nachal Charedi. Their budget obviously grows, and they have to fundraise for all that. So this partnership has, you know, the government funded, the privately funded, and yeah, they're in charge of the spiritual and non-army aspects of things.
Thank you very, very, very much. We have been listening to Yehuda and Bronia Shaffer sharing their experiences. He as a lone soldier and Bronia as a mother. And if any of you want to find out more about Nachal Haredi, please contact me. And also Evelyn Weinberger is a coordinator for Nachal Haredi here in the States, and her mobile number is 845-791-4114, and she'll be able to put you in touch with Rabbi Tzvi Klebenauer. Evelyn also has an email address, which is weinbergevelyn@gmail.com. I'd like to thank everyone for being here and for all of you for listening, and to wish you Gemar Chasima Tova. And next week, Mitzvah Hashem, I will be having a Canadian soldier who is a chaplain, who will be telling us about what it is like to be a chaplain and a frum Jew in the Canadian Army. And Mitzvah Hashem, we will then be having a third program talking about what does it mean for a soldier, especially a Nachal Haredi soldier, to reintegrate into the American society. Thank you very much. Kol Tov, everyone. And Hashem should answer all our tefillahs. We should be zoicher to a good year of simcha and shalom and achdus in Klal Yisrael and in Eretz Yisrael. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Wonderful. You lost the shul bracha?
I don't know what he has to do.